It's another edition of Time About the Movies, and today we're taking a look at the four films of August 10th, 2007. Now, on today's show, we have a sequel that some people have been waiting for, although I would honestly say it's about 3 years too late, but we'll take a look at that one. We'll take a look at Matthew Vaughn's first major feature film after Layer Cake, Stardust, a sequel nobody was asking for, and a film from After Dark Films. If you remember that brief time when they were putting out movies that hoping to be the next big horror hit for Lionsgate, but we'll delve into those as we go along here. But let's start off with the first movie we have here, and that is the return of Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker in Rush Hour 3. Rush Hour 3, the third installment of the Rush Hour franchise, coming 6 years after the last movie, which, as I've said it before with comedy sequels, usually you'd want to get them out between 2 to 3 years after the last movie came out, not 6 years, because 6 years later, it just feels like desperation at this point. I mean, Lethal Weapon's probably a great example of that. Now, there have been a few exceptions of that, of course, with, Beverly Hills Cop, Bad Boys, many movies we've talked about before in the past, and in this film, of course, you have the return of Jackie Chan as Inspector Lee and Chris Tucker as Officer Carter, who track down an assassin played by Hiroyuki Sanada to Paris to unravel a mystery about the Chinese triads. And, I like the first two Rush Hour movies. I think they're fine as they are. I know this one did not get the best reviews when this came out. Most people really didn't like it, but it did end up becoming a hit overall. And, compared to the other movies, I think this one's pretty good. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, if you go into these movies knowing what you're going into with the other two movies, this isn't the worst sequel that they could do with this overall. I mean, it's definitely a step down from the last movie, but it isn't anything that terrible. I mean, Lethal Weapon 4 I'll say this about Lethal Weapon 4. There's a lot of things about that movie that don't work, but there's some stuff in there that does work overall, where it's passable, but it is indeed the worst of the Lethal Weapon movies. And you could say the same thing about Rush Hour 3. There's a lot in here that doesn't work, but there's a lot of stuff that still does work. Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker still work off each other very well. The new additions they add to the cast that do work very well, including Max von Sydow, the girl in this movie, the woman in this, Nomi, she's like a French actress, I think, Nomi Lenore. She's a beautiful looking woman. She was actually pretty good in the film. I was actually kind of surprised how much I enjoyed her in this. But, I thought she was pretty good in here. It's a standard story overall. There's nothing really that spectacular overall in terms of, like anything that's going to be something that takes us to the next level and beyond. But, it is what it is. If you know what you're going into, chances are you're going to enjoy it for what it is. But if you're going into this expecting some grand, epic, grandiose adventure that's really going to stand the test of time or just break new grounds like the original Lethal Weapon or even the first Rush Hour, you're going to be very disappointed by it. But if you know what you're going into with the third installment of the Rush Hour series, you should have a good time with it overall. It's a very enjoyable film. It's the definition of a summer blockbuster movie. Yeah, it's not as good as the other two movies, but it's still very enjoyable for what it is. So yeah, I give Rush Hour 3 a pass overall. I mean, it's a fun film overall. Still has some moments that make me laugh overall, but like I said, it's the weaker of the three films, but still enjoyable enough for me to at least recommend it. If you see the other two movies and you like those, you're really going to like this one. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next movie. Another really good movie that came out this weekend that didn't get the proper attention back then and still kind of feels a little underrated today. That's Matthew Vaughn's version of Stardust. I seriously don't know what's funny about that trailer right there. The fact that it comes after a commercial for Vagisil, or the fact that the editing on that is so weird that, you've got Michelle Pfeiffer taking her clothes off, and then you got all these power guys going like, yeah, oh, yeah, nudity, like that type of stuff. Or the fact that this is coming out as I'm recording this, a few days after Neil Gaiman was accused of sexual assault charges, harassment charges, that type of stuff. Yeah, a lot of things to really delve in here with this particular film. Not really to the related to the film itself, just because of the commercials and what's going on at the time of recording this on January 17th, 2025. But this is one of Neil Gaiman's best-known graphic novels, getting the big screen treatment, and this is Matthew Vaughn's first American directorial effort following Layer Cake, which is a great film. And a really good cast overall in here. You got Charlie Cox from Daredevil, Ben Barnes, Michelle Pfeiffer, Claire Danes, Sienna Miller, Mark Strong, Jason Fleming, Rupert Everett, Ricky Gervais, Nathaniel Parker, Peter O'Toole, David Kelly, Robert De Niro, Henry Cavill. The film's narration is done by Ian McKellen, and just so many people involved with this film. But what about the movie itself? The passage from this world to the fantasy kingdom of Stormhold is through a breach in the wall beside an English village. In the 1800s, a boy, played by Charlie Cox, becomes a man when he ventures through the breach in pursuit of a falling star, to prove his love for the village beauty, played by Sienna Miller. The star is no lump of rock, it's a maiden, played by Claire Danes. Tristan, the youth, is not the only one looking for her. Three witches, led by Lamia, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, wants her heart to make them young, and the sons of the dead king of Stronghold want her because she holds a ruby that will give one of them a title to the throne. Assisting Tristan and her mother, the victim of the spell, is a transvestite pirate of the skies, played by Robert De Niro, which is very, very interesting. I'll give it that. I mean, this is a weird, bizarre fantasy comedy, kind of in the same style of something like The Princess Bride. And just like The Princess Bride, I think it's a really good movie. It's a solid, fun movie that appeals to every type of movie lover. And I think Matthew Vaughn and Jade Goldman do a great job of adapting the Gaiman novel to the big screen and not doing a straightforward adaptation either. I mean, Gaiman himself gave the script his blessing because he didn't want people to go to the theater to see a film that attempted to be completely loyal to the book and failed. And you know, that sounds a lot familiar to another DC-oriented project that we'll eventually get to, which, yeah, this, by the way, this is based off of a DC comic. I think it's a Vertigo comic, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember when I did the DC Ember post back in about 10 years ago, I remember that was one of the ones on there, But yeah, a lot of the casting choices in this movie are really good. You got Charlie Cox, who's proven how good of an actor he's become. Sienna Miller, Claire Danes, they're both really good here. Michelle Pfeiffer's a really good villain. You know, she's one of those few actresses that can play good villain roles. I mean, she's way better than somebody like, you know, Marion Cotillard in, like, The Dark Knight Rises, or Salma Hayek in something like Savages. Like, she's up there with Ava Green. Michelle Pfeiffer's up there with Ava Green as somebody who could play villainous roles very well. You got Robert De Niro playing that bizarre character, but he really is one of the highlights of the movie. He just lets himself go and does whatever the hell he wants with this and gives maybe one of the funniest performances of his career in this movie. You've got great performances by Ricky Gervais and Peter O'Toole. The visuals are very impressive here with a much smaller budget, too. I mean, this is a much smaller budget than most summer blockbusters, and they did a pretty good job with the budget that they had to work with here. The action scenes can look pretty good. The direction of the film is handled very well, and you know, I like a lot of Matthew Vaughn movies. Of course, the last movie he made, Argyle, was an abysmal mess, but I like the Kingsman movies. I like what he did with Kick-Ass, but X-Men First Class, not so much. I'm one of those few people that really does not like that movie, but this movie I do really like a lot. Stardust is a movie that appeals to all different kinds of audiences. You know, the action lovers, the adventure lovers, the chick flick lovers, the comedy lovers, the fantasy lovers, the epic film lovers. Everybody can find something to love about this movie. It's a movie that does take you completely by surprise, and by the end of it, you're just having a great time watching it. It's a really good movie, man. I highly recommend checking out Stardust. You will not be disappointed about it. If you love The Princess Bride, you're going to love the hell out of Stardust. Which is more than I could say about her next movie. Let's go ahead and take a look at the sequel that nobody was asking for. At least people were kind of curious about what a third Rush Hour movie would be like. I'm guaranteeing you that nobody in their right mind wanted to see a sequel to Daddy Daycare of all movies. But they got one, and not with Eddie Murphy or Steve Zahn. No, we had to get Cuba Gooding Jr. and some guy that I've never even seen before with Daddy Day Camp. Really? Somebody at Sony looked at this and said, clearly this is meant to go on the big screen. What do you mean people won't go to see it because we don't have Eddie Murphy or Jeff Garlin back? You know, just replace him with Cuba Gooding Jr. and this guy that nobody's ever heard of. Nobody will be able to know the difference. Yeah, because you won't be able to tell the difference between Eddie Murphy and Cuba Gooding Jr. Sweet mother of God. I mean, just when you think that Boat Trip and Radio were the worst things that Cuba Gooding Jr. could ever associate himself with, this right here. This is the bottom of the barrel. Because at least with Boat Trip, there's at least a so bad it's good mentality to that movie. And Roger Moore is very funny in that movie. At least in Radio, the intentions were good, but the film was just such a bad mess overall. This right here is the worst of the worst. This dude, who's won an Academy Award with Cuba Gooding Jr., should know better than to step into a movie like this. I don't know what the hell they were thinking with this, but lo and behold, that's the film we have here. And I'm just getting the plot right here because it's not available on the Wikipedia page. But Charlie Hinton and Phil Ryerson are back in this hilarious all-new adventure. That is a complete lie right there. When they expand their daycare magic to underdog Camp Driftwood, they discover that teamwork combined with some downright crazy antics is the right mix to give the kids an unforgettable camp experience. This movie is an abomination of a movie because we're taking a movie that wasn't even that good to begin with, but was a success regardless, and we're completely watering it down even more than we did before. We're not going to get anybody back from the last movie. Was Eddie Murphy's too good for us, even though he did Norbit, which I'll give him credit for Norbit because he had an idea of what Norbit was supposed to be. He had an idea to do something that was going to be what he thought was entertainment. Yeah, I can't blame him for saying no to this movie. I can't blame Jeff Garlin for saying no to this because you know what he's like. Hey, I've got Larry David and Curb Your Enthusiasm right here. I don't need to do another one of these. Like, if you can't even get Regina King to come back for this movie, and you had to get Tamala Jones, who it's a great actress overall, very underrated actress, but. Yeah, like, if you can't even get her to come back in this movie, they can't even get the kids to come back in this movie. The kids were too good for this. The kids are too good for this mess of a film. That's how bad this movie is. This film is a disastrous comedy, one of the worst sequels ever made. Like, most people thought around this time that we wouldn't get bad movies like this. Like, most of these bad movies would go straight to DVD where they would go to die, but not this movie. No, somebody at Sony had the brilliant idea to put this out and think it was going to be a success, and it was not whatsoever. It was panned by critics. It was one of the biggest flops of the year. It's one of the worst sequels ever produced, and it killed whatever career that Fred Savage would have had as a film director, because he directed this movie after many years of working as a television director, of course. Started his career off with the Wonder Years and became a pretty prominent television director, and this is supposed to be his big breakout film, and this is the result he gives us. And it's just like, yeah, just an abomination of a movie, an absolute mess. What more do you have to say about this movie that hasn't already been said already? It's a terrible movie. It's a disaster on so many levels. It's a film that forced Cuba Gooding Jr. to spend the next 5 years working in really bad direct-to-video films until Lee Daniels gave him a call up and said, hey, I know you keep starring in these bad movies, but I know that you won an Academy Award. I have this movie called The Butler. Are you in? Yeah. It took him that much time before we saw Cuba Gooding Jr. in a movie that everyone got to see. Like, what more do I even need to say about this movie, man? This is terrible. This is one of the worst movies ever made. I mean, are you really that surprised? Are you really that amazed that this is one of the worst movies ever made? The concept was just bad on so many levels, on its own merits. Yeah. I have nothing else to say. Daddy Day Camp sucks. Avoid it like the plague. So, with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our last movie that we have here, and that is Skinwalkers. Now, I think people know what they're missing. They're missing a bland, terrible, really bad horror movie from a company that was trying to cement itself as the future of horror films. I mean, After Dark Films was a big deal because they were trying to put these movies out here to prove to everyone that they were the next big thing, and Lionsgate was looking for the next big franchise to create after Saw and Hostel, and yeah. Needless to say, this wasn't it. In accordance with the Navajo's legend, a 13-year-old boy will finish with the curse of the powerful skinwalkers, aka werewolves. The half-breed boy Timothy is raised by human mother Rachel and protected by his skinwalker relatives since he was born. His grandmother Nana, his uncle Jonas, and his cousin Catherine and her boyfriend Adam and their friend Doak have kept the secret about his bloodline, and neither Timothy nor Rachel know the tragic curse. A couple of days before Timmy's 13th birthday, a pack of evil skinwalkers that have tasted blood, led by the evil Varric, chases the boy while his family protects him. Again, fitting that we're getting a Wolfman movie this weekend with the Wolfman movie remake by Blumhouse. And yeah, and just this past month, we had Werewolves, which was another movie that was very poorly reviewed. And not surprisingly, this was also poorly reviewed as well. This was a film that had to be trimmed down because they wanted to get a PG-13 rating out of it. And, wasting the creature effects for Stan Winston. I mean, if you're going to do this movie, you have Stan Winston there. Put the money into something like that instead of using CG effects, which this movie does. I mean, when your biggest stars in the movie are Elias Koteas and Mona Mitra, that's not a good sign going forward. And if there's anything this movie has going for it, one of the writers is the guy who would later create The Purge. So I guess there's that. And and the other co-writer is the dude from Psych, who was also at Dukes of Hazzard, James Roday. But yeah. Other than that, though, this movie sucks. This is another one of those bad movies that thinks it's something very special, and it's just not. It's a terrible movie. It's not clever. It's not scary. It's not enjoyable. It just sucks. It just absolutely 100% sucks. It came here to die on this weekend, and nobody went to go see it, and even the people that did go to see it don't remember it at all, except for it being a bad movie. And yeah, I can't blame it for that. So yeah, not much more to say about that one. Skinwalkers, like I said, avoid it like the plague. And so with all of that said, we wrap up another edition of Time About the Movies. Now, the next time we meet, we'll have at least 5-6 new movies, I think. I know we're going to talk about Superbad, which was the biggest comedy hit of the summer. Made stars out of Michael Cera, Jonah Hill, and a 2-time Academy Award winner. We'll get to that. We'll talk about her on the next episode. We'll also talk about another remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, this time with Nicole Kidman and Daniel Craig in it, The Invasion. A movie I barely remember, The Last Legion. We have Death at a Funeral, which later went on to have a remake not but a couple years later with Chris Rock in it, but this is the original version with Peter Dinklage. We also have, I think it is just 5 movies here. I'm thinking maybe there's one more here, but no, there's one more movie I want to cover here, and that's The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, directed by Seth Gordon, who would later go on to direct a couple comedies that we'll get to eventually, but we'll talk about that movie. So 5 films overall to take a look at next time around. We'll delve into that on tomorrow's show. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more videos like this, please go ahead and hit that like button, the subscribe button, the notification button, and the bell, because you get updates on when new videos come out, and we do post here every day. Also, check out our playlist, and check out the last episode I did. And stick around, because coming up after I upload this, there'll be a new Time About the Movies flashback, where we'll flashback to August 14th, 1987, with 5 movies, including Patrick Dempsey in Can't Buy Me Love, Gene Hackman in No Way Out, The Fat Boys in Disorderlies, The Monster Squad, and also North Shore. So we'll take a look at those 5 movies. That'll be coming up on Time About the Movies flashback, and I'll tell you about all of that right after I'm done posting this. So stick around, because we will be right back.